How do you feel about the potential for great advances in human longevity science that have been occurring in recent years? Do you feel excited about the prospect of living a much longer life, or are you indifferent? Are you nervous about the prospects of what this sort of tinkering with genetics and human nature might bring? Is the potential for a vastly expanded lifespan going to be something that everyone can enjoy, or will it be an advantage simply for those that can afford it? If you could live 100 years longer, would you want to? Would you care if the opportunity were afforded to you as an individual? Would such a huge opportunity lead to a new and beautiful life on Earth, or would Earth somehow take these momentous advantages and turn the world on its head? Many years ago, when I was an undergraduate at Penn State, our professor posited similar questions in our genetics class, which played a major role in affecting my beliefs toward the subject of hyperlongevity and genetic engineering. The class was large, with more than 100 students, and my professor asked the class what their opinions were regarding the use of genetic manipulation and engineering to alter human life. Surprisingly, the class was completely silent. In response to this silence, the professor called up two students to debate the subject. One of my classmates volunteered to voice his opposition to genetic engineering, and I chose to volunteer, providing an argument in favor of it. My opponent voiced his opinion to the class that genetic engineering for this purpose would be ethically wrong, because it is not in man's best interest to play God. Most of our classmates seemed to agree, nodding subtly in agreement. I felt as though I was standing upon a grand crossroads of history. As I looked around the class, it felt as though all of my classmates, for all of their cliquish differences, were being incredibly close-minded, like they just accepted what they had been told all their lives, and were afraid to think for themselves. After the professor gauged the response of the students, I had my opportunity to argue in favor of this advanced human genetic engineering. I glanced around the class and felt my argument come together cleanly in my mind. I saw white girls with bleached hair stretching down their backs, more than a few of which had fake breasts. I saw black girls with expensive weaves and complex and expensive hairstyles. There were white students mimicking their hip-hop and rap idols, and I even saw a young Asian student that had very obviously dyed her hair red. In my class, I saw a great commingling of different styles. People both attempting to exemplify American standards of beauty and those taking on the aspects of other cultures, adopting them as their own. As I looked around at all of this, recognizing the great diversity in my class, I had a strong feeling that there was not one person in the class that didn't have at least one thing they wanted to alter about the characteristics they were born with. I continued thinking to myself that these students probably wanted to be different in a variety of different ways. Some wanted to be smarter, some taller. Some girls wished they had larger breasts, and some guys wanted larger penises. Others probably wished that they didn't have to go through the trouble to put in contacts and hair dyes to look like the person they wished they were. For myself, I would have given anything just to be a few inches taller. After standing quietly for a moment with all of these thoughts running through my head at a rapid pace, I spoke from my position in the back of the class and suddenly stated loudly, "Genetic freedom." I felt that just those two words spoke for themselves, but my professor threw a dejected glance in my direction, and I could detect her shaking her head almost imperceptibly. Her silence was a sign that she needed more. After the brief silence, I continued. I argued to the class that the individual should have full control to alter his DNA as he sees fit, so long as it doesn't negatively impact society or the rights of anyone else. She seemed thoroughly unhappy with the argument, and the class began to chatter loudly, nearly in unison. After the short spate of controlled chaos, the class continued with liveliness and energy, but I felt that others in the class largely shunned me as a result of the fervent beliefs I expressed in regard to what legitimately amounted to the potential future of the human race. I still laugh to myself to this day about how my belief met such incredulity in the face of so many. In the future, once science makes it possible to make such powerful changes to humanity at the genetic level, I am confident that these same students, if given the actual opportunity to improve themselves through futuristic genetic methods, would absolutely jump at the chance with no second thought. It wouldn't be playing God. It wouldn't be unethical. It would simply be a new reality. In fact, once the time comes to pass when genetic alteration becomes a reality, the exact same people today that seek out plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery will clamor for these procedures as soon as they become available. In the end, I believe I made a B in the course, which is regretful because I've always remained highly interested in genetics. Another of my professors at Penn State, himself with a doctorate in genetics, explained an interesting aspect of human evolution, one which I had never thought of before. He explained that the many races that make up humanity as a whole develop their differences as a result of dispersing far from one another and slowly adapting to their new environments over time. After they migrated, geography, distance, and other factors kept them from interacting heavily with one another, which caused their minor adaptations to become more pronounced. In the same way that they developed their own habits and cultures, their aesthetic and physical makeup also changed. Some grew taller, others grew paler, and each individual culture became maximally resistant to the diseases which were prominent in their area. Even though these physical and genetic changes were significant, any healthy woman on Earth could still mate with any other healthy man, no matter how different he looked or acted. What he said that truly sparked my mind was that if the different races of human beings stayed geographically isolated from one another for a longer period of time, eventually the different races could have changed enough to where they could no longer produce children with one another. This can also apply to the future of genetic engineering. The modern world is so interconnected that geography has no impact on the ability of humans to breed with one another. But genetic enhancement may lead to a point at which a human born today would not be able to mate with an individual that was the result of generations of genetically altered parents. As genetic engineering becomes more advanced, humans may change enough at the genetic level to prevent interbreeding between lineages that have undergone these advancements and those that chose not to. This change would, of course, be gradual, first reducing the ability to conceive before denying that ability altogether. At this point, it would take genetic engineering just to create a viable child for two disparate humans. Interestingly enough, it may even come to pass that different species of humans evolve from such endeavors, as distinct from one another as they are from humans themselves. The beginning of this story could begin sometime in the next 100 years, as scientists and medical specialists develop the ability to safely and effectively alter DNA to meet the specifications of the individual. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video series discussing the ethics of genetic engineering and the future of genetic engineering in general.